Madison Chun had always been careful about her appearance at Riverside Preparatory Academy. Every morning, she'd iron her thrift store blouse twice, polish her scuffed shoes until they gleamed, and tie her hair back with the same faded blue ribbon she'd owned for 3 years. What she didn't know was that today would be the day everything changed, and it would start with a single, cruel laugh echoing through the marble hallways of the most prestigious private school in California. Before we jump back in, tell us where you're tuning in from, and if this story touches you, make sure you're subscribed because tomorrow I've saved something extra special for you. The crisp October morning felt different as Madison stepped through the towering oak doors of Riverside Preparatory Academy. The school's Gothic architecture cast long shadows across the courtyard, where clusters of students gathered in their perfectly pressed uniforms and designer accessories. Madison clutched her worn canvas backpack tighter, the frayed straps a stark contrast to the leather satchels and luxury purses surrounding her. She had earned her place at Riverside through academic excellence, not family wealth. Her scholarship covered tuition, but everything else, the uniforms, supplies, and social expectations, fell on her mother's shoulders. Sarah Chun worked double shifts at the local diner, her fingers permanently stained with coffee and determination to give her daughter opportunities she never had. Madison's uniform told the story of their sacrifices. The navy blazer, purchased secondhand from a graduating senior, had been carefully altered to fit her smaller frame. The white shirt beneath had been washed so many times it carried the faintest yellow tinge, and her shoes polished religiously. Each night couldn't hide the fact that they'd been resoled twice. But Madison wore these clothes with dignity, believing that her mind mattered more than her appearance. The morning started normally enough. Madison navigated through her advanced calculus class, where she consistently outperformed her classmates, and excelled in her AP literature discussion about social inequality, an irony that wasn't lost on her. Her teachers respected her intellect, and a few students had even begun to warm up to her quiet confidence. For a moment, she allowed herself to believe she was finally finding her place. That illusion shattered during lunch period. The cafeteria at Riverside was a carefully orchestrated social hierarchy. The elite students claimed the center tables, their conversations punctuated by casual mentions of family vacations to Europe and weekend shopping trips to Rodeo Drive. Madison typically sat alone near the windows, content to read while eating her packed lunch, a simple sandwich and apple that her mother prepared each morning with love. Today, however, fate had other plans. Brittany Harrington, the undisputed queen of Riverside's social scene, sat surrounded by her carefully curated circle of followers. Her father owned a chain of luxury hotels, and she wore her privilege like armor. Designer everything, from her perfectly straightened platinum blonde hair to her custom-tailored uniform that somehow made the school's standard attire look like haute couture. "Oh my God, look at her shoes." Brittany's voice cut through the cafeteria chatter like a blade. She wasn't even trying to whisper. Madison looked up from her book, hoping against hope that Brittany was talking about someone else. But those cold blue eyes were fixed directly on her, and a circle of perfectly manicured fingers pointed in her direction. "Are those from Payless? I didn't know they still made shoes like that," Brittany continued, her voice dripping with mock concern. Someone should tell her this isn't the 1990s. The cafeteria began to quiet, conversations fading as students turned to watch the spectacle unfold. Madison felt her cheeks burn with humiliation, but she kept her eyes on her book, hoping that ignoring the comments would make them stop. But Brittany was just getting started. "And that blazer, Jessica, didn't your sister graduate like 3 years ago? I swear she had the exact same one, with the same little pulled thread on the sleeve." Brittany's laugh was sharp and cruel, echoing off the cafeteria walls. "How sweet that they're recycling uniforms now. Very sustainable." Madison's grip tightened on her book, her knuckles white with tension. She could feel dozens of eyes. On her, some filled with pity, others with cruel amusement. The weight of their stares was suffocating. "I heard her mom works at that greasy diner on 5th Street, chimed in Chelsea Morrison, Brittany's most devoted follower. "Maybe that's where she gets her fashion inspiration. Very working class chic." The group erupted in laughter, the sound sharp and vicious. Madison's vision blurred with unshed tears, but she refused to let them fall. She wouldn't give them the satisfaction. "You know what?" Brittany stood up, her chair scraping against the floor with dramatic flair. "I think we should start a charity drive. Poor little Madison here clearly needs some help with her wardrobe situation. Maybe we can collect some of our old clothes, No, the ones that are too outdated even, for goodwill." The cruelty in her voice was breathtaking. Madison finally looked up, meeting Brittany's gaze with as much dignity as she could muster. In that moment, she saw not just teenage meanness, but something deeper, a calculated cruelty that spoke to a fundamental lack of empathy. "That's very generous of you," Madison said quietly, her voice steady despite the storm raging inside her. "But I'm perfectly fine with what I have." Brittany's smile turned predatory. "Oh, honey, no, you're really not. I mean, look around. This is Riverside Preparatory Academy, not some public school. We have standards here. Image matters. And frankly, you're bringing down the whole aesthetic of our institution." The words hit Madison like physical blows. She had always known she was different from her classmates, but she had hoped that her academic achievements and quiet dignity would earn her respect. Instead, she was being reduced to nothing more than the sum of her second-hand clothes and her mother's working-class job. "Maybe you'd be more comfortable at Lincoln High," suggested Trevor Hamilton, another member of Brittany's circle. His family owned a tech company, and he wore his arrogance like a designer suit. "They're probably more accommodating to your situation over there." Madison gathered her things with trembling hands, her sandwich forgotten and her appetite completely gone. As she stood to leave, Brittany delivered her final blow. "Oh, and Madison? Maybe tell your mom that the diner uniform look isn't really working for you here. Just a friendly tip." The cafeteria exploded in laughter, and Madison felt something inside her break. Not just her pride, that had been shattered long ago, but her faith in the fundamental decency of people. She walked out of the cafeteria with her head held high, but once she reached the empty hallway, the tears finally came. What Madison didn't know was that her father had been watching from the shadows, having arrived early to surprise her with lunch. Dr. Jonathan Chun had built his software empire from nothing, driven by the same determination that now burned in his daughter's eyes. He had specifically chosen to keep a low profile about his wealth, wanting Madison to succeed on her own merits rather than his money. But as he watched his daughter endure that public humiliation, something fundamental shifted inside him. The quiet, humble approach was no longer enough. It was time for action. Madison spent the rest of the day in a daze, mechanically attending classes while the morning's events replayed in her mind. She wondered if she should tell her mother what had happened, but the thought of adding to Sarah's worries felt unbearable. Her mother already sacrificed so much working extra shifts to afford Madison's school supplies, mending clothes late into the night, missing social events because every penny went toward her daughter's education. The final bell rang, and Madison gathered her things slowly, dreading the thought of facing the same hallways tomorrow. As she walked toward the exit, she noticed a familiar figure waiting by the school's main entrance, a man in a simple gray suit who looked remarkably like her, despite the expensive cut of his clothing. Preparing and narrating this story took us a lot of time, so if you are enjoying it, subscribe to our channel. It means a lot to us. Now back to the story. "Dad?" Madison's voice was barely a whisper. "What are you doing here?" Jonathan Chun stood against the backdrop of Riverside Preparatory's impressive stone facade, his presence somehow both understated and commanding. Madison approached him slowly, confusion evident in her still red eyes. I finished my meetings early and thought I'd surprise you, he said gently, though his jaw was tight with barely contained anger. How was your day, sweetheart? Madison hesitated. Her father had always been supportive but distant, traveling frequently for his mysterious business ventures. She knew he worked in technology, but the details remained vague. He drove a modest sedan, lived in their comfortable but unremarkable suburban home, and never spoke about money, leading Madison to assume they were solidly middle class, just getting by. It was fine, she lied, adjusting her backpack straps. Nervously, Jonathan's dark eyes studied his daughter's face with the same analytical precision that had made him one of Silicon Valley's most successful entrepreneurs. He recognized the telltale signs of emotional trauma, the slight tremor in her voice, the way she avoided his gaze, the defensive posture she'd adopted. Madison, he said softly, I saw what happened in the cafeteria. The words hit her like a physical blow. Madison's carefully constructed facade crumbled, and fresh tears began to fall. You were there? I was coming to surprise you with lunch when I heard the commotion. I stayed to see how you'd handle it. His voice carried a mixture of pride and fury. You showed remarkable composure under pressure. They walked to his car in silence, Madison wrestling with embarrassment that her father had witnessed her humiliation. As they drove through the winding streets of their suburban neighborhood, Jonathan made a decision that would change everything. Madison, there's something I need to tell you about my work, he began, his hands gripping the steering wheel tighter. The company I founded, Chun Dynamics, it's not just a small tech firm. We developed the operating system that runs on 60% of the world's smartphones. Madison stared at him, processing this information. What do you mean? I mean we're not struggling financially, sweetheart. We never have been. Your mother and I chose to live modestly because we wanted you to understand the value of hard work, to develop character and empathy. We never wanted you to become entitled or disconnected from reality. The revelation hit Madison like a tsunami. So you could have afforded the designer uniforms? Expensive supplies? All this time, I've been worried about Mom working double shifts. Your mother works because she loves her job and the people she serves, not because we need the money. We've been saving everything for your future college, graduate school, whatever path you choose. Jonathan pulled into their driveway, turning to face his daughter. But after what I witnessed today, I think it's time for a different approach. That evening, the Chun family sat around their modest dinner table, a scene that had played out thousands of times before, but felt entirely different now. Sarah Chun, still wearing her diner uniform, listened as her husband recounted the day's events. Those children were cruel beyond belief, Jonathan said, his voice tight with controlled rage. And the school did nothing. The staff pretended not to notice. The administration turned a blind eye. They're complicit in this toxic environment. Sarah reached across the table to squeeze Madison's hand. Honey, why didn't you tell us you were having problems at school? I thought I could handle it, Madison whispered. I thought if I just worked harder, proved myself academically, they'd eventually accept me. You shouldn't have to prove anything to anyone, Jonathan said firmly. You earned your place at that school through merit, not charity, and you deserve to be treated with respect. Over the next few days, Jonathan Chen began a quiet investigation into Riverside Preparatory Academy. Using his extensive network of contacts and resources, he discovered troubling patterns that went far beyond Madison's experience. The school's culture of elitism wasn't accidental, it was institutional. Faculty members regularly showed preferential treatment to students from wealthy families, while scholarship recipients were subtly marginalized. Academic competitions were rigged to favor students who could afford private tutoring. Even disciplinary actions were inconsistent, with wealthy students receiving warnings while less privileged ones faced suspension for identical infractions. Jonathan's research revealed that Brittany Harrington had been involved in similar bullying incidents before, but her father's generous donations to the school had ensured the matters were quietly swept under the rug. The administration prioritized financial contributions over student welfare, creating an environment where cruelty thrived unchecked. Meanwhile, Madison returned to school each day with growing dread. The cafeteria incident had emboldened other students to join in the harassment. Anonymous notes appeared in her locker, mocking her appearance and suggesting she didn't belong. Someone had even created a cruel social media account dedicated to documenting her fashion disasters. The psychological toll was devastating. Madison's grades began to slip as she struggled to concentrate. She stopped participating in class discussions, afraid that drawing attention would invite more ridicule. Her love of learning once her greatest strength was being systematically destroyed by the toxic environment. Brittany Harrington, sensing weakness, escalated her campaign of terror. She organized outfit critique sessions, where she and her followers would rate students' appearances, always ensuring Madison received the lowest scores. She started a rumor that Madison's scholarship was actually a charity case sponsored by the school's cleaning staff. The cruelty was calculated and relentless. Maybe if you tried a little harder with your appearance, people would take you more seriously, Brittany suggested during one particularly vicious encounter in the bathroom. I mean, I get that you're poor, but surely you can afford some basic makeup? Even drugstore brands are better than nothing. Madison stared at herself in the mirror, seeing her reflection through the lens of her tormentor's criticism. Her natural beauty, the high cheekbones inherited from her mother, the intelligent eyes that reflected her inner strength, had been reduced to a catalog of inadequacies in her own mind. That night, Madison made a decision that broke her parents' hearts. She approached them with a carefully rehearsed speech about transferring to the local public school, claiming she'd be happier in a less competitive environment. She spoke about wanting to be closer to home, to have more time for family, to explore different opportunities. But Jonathan and Sarah saw through her words to the pain beneath. Their daughter, once confident and ambitious, was being systematically destroyed by institutional cruelty. The light in her eyes had dimmed, replaced by a defeated resignation that no 16-year-old should ever have to carry. Absolutely not, Jonathan said quietly, his voice carrying the steel that Madison had never heard before. You're not running away from this school. You earned your place there, and you're going to keep it. But Dad, I can't keep going through this every day. It's killing me. Then we'll change the environment, he replied, his decision crystallizing with each word. Sometimes the system needs to be reformed from the inside. And sometimes that requires leverage. Sarah looked at her husband with growing understanding. What are you thinking? Jonathan's smile was cold and calculating, the same expression that had intimidated competitors and impressed investors throughout his career. I'm thinking it's time Riverside Preparatory Academy learned about the real world. They understood that actions have consequences and that some people have more power than they realize. He pulled out his phone and began making calls, his fingers moving with practiced efficiency. The first call was to his corporate attorney, the second to his private investigator, and the third to his investment banker. Each conversation was brief, professional, and loaded with implications that would soon reshape the entire landscape of Riverside Preparatory Academy. Madison watched her father work, seeing him in an entirely new light. This wasn't the quiet, modest man she'd known her entire life. This was a predator who had been disguised as prey, a billionaire who had chosen humility until circumstances demanded otherwise. What are you doing? She asked, both fascinated and terrified by the transformation. Jonathan looked up from his phone, his eyes blazing with paternal fury and corporate determination. I'm buying your school, sweetheart. And then we're going to teach them what respect really means. The next morning brought an unusual flurry of activity to the administrative offices of Riverside Preparatory Academy. Dr. Margaret Whitmore, the school's headmistress, arrived to find her secretary frantically fielding calls from lawyers, accountants, and investment firms. The normally composed woman looked thoroughly overwhelmed. "Dr. Whitmore, there's been a development regarding the Henderson Trust," her secretary stammered, referencing the Academy's largest financial benefactor. "Apparently, their entire endowment is being restructured, and there are some complications." What Dr. Whitmore didn't know was that Jonathan Chun had spent the previous evening orchestrating a financial chess game that would make Gordon Gekko proud. The Henderson Trust, which provided nearly 40% of Riverside's operating budget, was actually a subsidiary of a holding company that Jonathan had quietly acquired 3 years earlier. A few strategic phone calls had activated clauses that would redirect the trust's funding unless certain conditions were met. Meanwhile, Madison walked through the school's hallways with a strange sense of detachment. Her father had assured her that changes were coming, but she couldn't imagine what form they might take. The bullying continued with predictable cruelty-whispered comments about her peasant clothes, deliberate shoulder bumps in the hallway, and the constant feeling of being watched and judged. During first-period chemistry, Madison found herself partnered with Alex Rodriguez, one of the few students who had remained neutral in the social warfare. Alex was the son of a successful lawyer, wealthy enough to fit in, but thoughtful enough to see beyond surface appearances. "You know they're just insecure, right?" Alex said quietly as they measured chemical solutions. "Brittany, especially. My dad handled her parents' divorce last year, ugly stuff. All that cruelty is just her way of feeling powerful when everything else in her life is falling apart." Madison appreciated the gesture, but emotional explanations didn't make the daily humiliation any easier to bear. "That doesn't change how she treats people." "No, it doesn't," Alex agreed. "But it might explain why she's about to get a very rude awakening." Before Madison could ask what he meant, their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the school's intercom system. Dr. Whitmore's voice, usually smooth and authoritative, carried an unmistakable note of tension. "All students and faculty, please report to the main auditorium for an emergency assembly. Classes are suspended until further notice." The auditorium buzzed with speculation as students filed in. Madison found herself sitting in the middle section, watching as her classmates whispered theories about everything from a gas leak to a celebrity visit. Brittany Harrington commanded her usual spot in the front row, surrounded by her followers like a queen holding court. Dr. Whitmore took the stage, her usually perfect composure slightly frayed around the edges. "Students, faculty, and staff, we have some important announcements regarding the future of Riverside Preparatory Academy." She paused, consulting her notes with the careful precision of someone delivering news they didn't fully understand. "Effective immediately, the school will be operating under new management. Our Board of Trustees has entered into a partnership with Chun Dynamics Corporation, a leading technology firm that has generously agreed to modernize our facilities and expand our educational programs." Madison felt her heart skip a beat. Chun Dynamics, her father's company. She glanced around nervously, wondering if anyone would make the connection to her surname. The new management structure will implement several changes designed to improve our academic environment and ensure that all students receive equal treatment regardless of their family's financial circumstances. Dr. Whitmore continued, her voice gaining strength as she read from her prepared statement. A murmur rippled through the auditorium. The student body was beginning to sense that something significant was happening, though they couldn't yet grasp the full implications. "First, we will be implementing a strict anti-bullying policy with zero tolerance for harassment based on socioeconomic status, appearance, or any other personal characteristics. Violations will result in immediate suspension and potential expulsion." Brittany's perfect composure flickered for just a moment, a flash of uncertainty crossing her features. Several students turned to look at Madison, finally beginning to connect the dots. Second, all students will be required to wear standardized uniforms provided by the school, eliminating any visible distinctions between students from different economic backgrounds. This announcement caused a more significant stir. The wealthy. Students had always used their expensive accessories and designer modifications to signal their status. The idea of true equality was clearly unsettling to many. Third, we will be conducting a comprehensive review of our disciplinary records and academic policies to ensure fairness and consistency in all our procedures. Dr. Whitmore's final announcement sent shockwaves through the auditorium. Finally, I'd like to introduce our new Director of Student Affairs, who will be overseeing these transitions and ensuring that Riverside Preparatory Academy becomes a model institution for educational excellence and social responsibility. The auditorium doors opened, and Jonathan Chun walked in, wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit that transformed him from the modest suburban father into the commanding presence of a billionaire CEO, his confident stride and authoritative bearing left no doubt about his true identity. Madison watched in stunned silence as her father took the stage, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every person in the auditorium. She could see the exact moment when her classmates realized who he was, the whispers, the pointing, the sudden shift in how they looked at her. "Good morning, students," Jonathan began, his voice carrying easily through the large space. "My name is Jonathan Chun, and I'm the founder and CEO of Chun Dynamics Corporation. Some of you may know my daughter, Madison Chun, who has been a student here for the past year." Every eye in the auditorium turned toward Madison, but instead of the usual mockery, she saw something entirely different: shock, fear, and dawning realization. Brittany Harrington had gone completely pale, her mouth slightly open as she processed the implications. Madison earned her place at this school through academic excellence, just as many of you did, Jonathan continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembled students. She's consistently ranked in the top 5% of her class, contributed meaningfully to classroom discussions, and conducted herself with dignity and grace despite facing significant challenges. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the auditorium. Unfortunately, some students have chosen to use their family's wealth as a weapon against their classmates. They've created an environment where cruelty is rewarded and kindness is seen as weakness. Madison could feel the tension in the room building like pressure in a sealed container. Her father's words were measured and professional, but there was an underlying current of barely contained fury that made everyone uncomfortable. "This behavior ends today," Jonathan declared, his voice hardening. "Riverside Preparatory Academy will no longer tolerate bullying, discrimination, or the systematic harassment of any student. We will create an environment where academic achievement and personal character matter more than family wealth or social status." He gestured toward Dr. Whitmore, who stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Dr. Whitmore will be working with our new administrative team to identify students who have violated our anti-bullying policies. These students will face appropriate consequences, up to and including expulsion." The auditorium had fallen completely silent. Madison could hear her own heartbeat as she watched her father systematically dismantle the social hierarchy that had tormented her for months. "Additionally," Jonathan continued, "we will be implementing new programs focused on empathy, social responsibility, and community service. Students will learn that privilege comes with responsibility, and that true leadership means lifting others up rather than tearing them down." Brittany Harrington finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. "You can't just change everything because your daughter couldn't handle a little teasing." The auditorium gasped at her audacity. Jonathan's expression didn't change, but his eyes locked onto Brittany with laser focus. "Miss Harrington," he said quietly, "what you call a little teasing constitutes systematic harassment and emotional abuse. Your behavior toward my daughter and other students has been documented, recorded, and will be reviewed by our disciplinary committee." Brittany's face flushed red, but she pressed on with the reckless determination of someone who had never faced real consequences. "This is ridiculous. You can't buy a school just because someone hurt your precious daughter's feelings." Jonathan's smile was cold and predatory. "Miss Harrington, you're about to learn that actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences are more severe than you could possibly imagine." The following week transformed Riverside Preparatory Academy into something unrecognizable. Gone were the subtle hierarchies and whispered cruelties that had defined the school's social landscape. In their place emerged a system of accountability that left no room for the casual brutality that had flourished for years. "Dr. Whitmore, there's been a development regarding the Henderson Trust," her secretary stammered, referencing the Academy's largest financial benefactor. "Apparently, their entire endowment is being restructured, and there are some complications." What Dr. Whitmore didn't know was that Jonathan Chun had spent the previous evening orchestrating a financial chess game that would make Gordon Gekko proud. The Henderson Trust, which provided nearly 40% of Riverside's operating budget, was actually a subsidiary of a holding company that Jonathan had quietly acquired 3 years earlier. A few strategic phone calls had activated clauses that would redirect the trust's funding unless certain conditions were met. Meanwhile, Madison walked through the school's hallways with a strange sense of detachment. Her father had assured her that changes were coming, but she couldn't imagine what form they might take. The bullying continued with predictable cruelty-whispered comments about her peasant clothes, deliberate shoulder bumps in the hallway, and the constant feeling of being watched and judged. During first-period chemistry, Madison found herself partnered with Alex Rodriguez, one of the few students who had remained neutral in the social warfare. Alex was the son of a successful lawyer, wealthy enough to fit in, but thoughtful enough to see beyond surface appearances. "You know they're just insecure, right?" Alex said quietly as they measured chemical solutions. "Brittany, especially. My dad handled her parents' divorce last year, ugly stuff. All that cruelty is just her way of feeling powerful when everything else in her life is falling apart." Madison appreciated the gesture, but emotional explanations didn't make the daily humiliation any easier to bear. "That doesn't change how she treats people." "No, it doesn't," Alex agreed. "But it might explain why she's about to get a very rude awakening." Before Madison could ask what he meant, their conversation was interrupted by an announcement over the school's intercom system. Dr. Whitmore's voice, usually smooth and authoritative, carried an unmistakable note of tension. "All students and faculty, please report to the main auditorium for an emergency assembly. Classes are suspended until further notice." The auditorium buzzed with speculation as students filed in. Madison found herself sitting in the middle section, watching as her classmates whispered theories about everything from a gas leak to a celebrity visit. Brittany Harrington commanded her usual spot in the front row, surrounded by her followers like a queen holding court. Dr. Whitmore took the stage, her usually perfect composure slightly frayed around the edges. "Students, faculty, and staff, we have some important announcements regarding the future of Riverside Preparatory Academy." She paused, consulting her notes with the careful precision of someone delivering news they didn't fully understand. "Effective immediately, the school will be operating under new management. Our Board of Trustees has entered into a partnership with Chun Dynamics Corporation, a leading technology firm that has generously agreed to modernize our facilities and expand our educational programs." Madison felt her heart skip a beat. Chun Dynamics, her father's company. She glanced around nervously, wondering if anyone would make the connection to her surname. The new management structure will implement several changes designed to improve our academic environment and ensure that all students receive equal treatment regardless of their family's financial circumstances. Dr. Whitmore continued her voice gaining strength as she read from her prepared statement. A murmur rippled through the auditorium. The student body was beginning to sense that something significant was happening, though they couldn't yet grasp the full implications. First, we will be implementing a strict anti-bullying policy with zero tolerance for harassment based on socioeconomic status, appearance, or any other personal characteristics. Violations will result in immediate suspension and potential expulsion. Brittany's perfect composure flickered for just a moment, a flash of uncertainty crossing her features. Several students turned to look at Madison, finally beginning to connect the dots. Second, all students will be required to wear standardized uniforms provided by the school, eliminating any visible distinctions between students from different economic backgrounds. This announcement caused a more significant stir. The wealthy students had always used their expensive accessories and designer modifications to signal their status. The idea of true equality was clearly unsettling to many. Third, we will be conducting a comprehensive review of our disciplinary records and academic policies to ensure fairness and consistency in all our procedures. Dr. Whitmore's final announcement sent shockwaves through the auditorium. Finally, I'd like to introduce our new Director of Student Affairs, who will be overseeing these transitions and ensuring that Riverside Preparatory Academy becomes a model institution for educational excellence and social responsibility. The auditorium doors opened and Jonathan Chun walked in, wearing an impeccably tailored navy suit that transformed him from the modest suburban father into the commanding presence of a billionaire CEO, his confident stride and authoritative bearing left no doubt about his true identity. Madison watched in stunned silence as her father took the stage, his presence immediately commanding the attention of every person in the auditorium. She could see the exact moment when her classmates realized who he was, the whispers, the pointing, the sudden shift in how they looked at her. "Good morning, students," Jonathan began, his voice carrying easily through the large space. "My name is Jonathan Chun, and I'm the founder and CEO of Chun Dynamics Corporation. Some of you may know my daughter, Madison Chen, who has been a student here for the past year." Every eye in the auditorium turned toward Madison, but instead of the usual mockery, she saw something entirely different: shock, fear, and dawning realization. Brittany Harrington had gone completely pale, her mouth slightly open as she processed the implications. Madison earned her place at this school through academic excellence, just as many of you did, Jonathan continued, his gaze sweeping across the assembled students. She's consistently ranked in the top 5% of her class, contributed meaningfully to classroom discussions, and conducted herself with dignity and grace despite facing significant challenges. He paused, letting the weight of his words settle over the auditorium. Unfortunately, some students have chosen to use their family's wealth as a weapon against their classmates. They've created an environment where cruelty is rewarded and kindness is seen as weakness. Madison could feel the tension in the room building like pressure in a sealed container. Her father's words were measured and professional, but there was an underlying current of barely contained fury that made everyone uncomfortable. "This behavior ends today," Jonathan declared, his voice hardening. "Riverside Preparatory Academy will no longer tolerate bullying, discrimination, or the systematic harassment of any student. We will create an environment where academic achievement and personal character matter more than family wealth or social status." He gestured toward Dr. Whitmore, who stepped forward with obvious reluctance. "Dr. Whitmore will be working with our new administrative team to identify students who have violated our anti-bullying policies. These students will face appropriate consequences, up to and including expulsion." The auditorium had fallen completely silent. Madison could hear her own heartbeat as she watched her father systematically dismantle the social hierarchy that had tormented her for months. "Additionally," Jonathan continued, We will be implementing new programs focused on empathy, social responsibility, and community service. Students will learn that privilege comes with responsibility, and that true leadership means lifting others up rather than tearing them down. Brittany Harrington finally found her voice, though it came out as a strangled whisper. You can't just change everything because your daughter couldn't handle a little teasing. The auditorium gasped at her audacity. Jonathan's expression didn't change, but his eyes locked onto Brittany with laser focus. Miss Harrington, he said quietly, what you call a little teasing constitutes systematic harassment and emotional abuse. Your behavior toward my daughter and other students has been documented, recorded, and will be reviewed by our disciplinary committee. Brittany's face flushed red, but she pressed on with the reckless determination of someone who had never faced real consequences. This is ridiculous. You can't buy a school just because someone hurt your precious daughter's feelings. Jonathan's smile was cold and predatory. Miss Harrington, you're about to learn that actions have consequences. And sometimes those consequences are more severe than you could possibly imagine. The following week transformed Riverside Preparatory Academy into something unrecognizable. Gone were the subtle hierarchies and whispered cruelties that had defined the school's social landscape. In their place emerged a system of accountability that left no room for the casual brutality that had flourished for years. Madison arrived at school Monday morning to find construction crews installing new security cameras throughout the hallways. Not just for safety, but for monitoring every interaction, every conversation, every moment of potential harassment would now be recorded and reviewed. The message was clear. The days of plausible deniability were over. The new uniform policy had taken effect immediately. Every student now wore identical blazers, shirts, and accessories provided by the school. The expensive watches, designer shoes, and luxury handbags that had once served as status symbols were conspicuously absent. For the first time in Riverside's history, students were truly equal in appearance. Brittany Harrington struggled visibly with this new reality. Stripped of her visual markers of superiority, she seemed smaller somehow, less commanding. Her usual entourage still surrounded her, but their loyalty appeared increasingly fragile as the power structure they had relied upon crumbled around them. This is insane, Brittany muttered to Chelsea Morrison as they walked to their first period class. He can't just waltz in here and change everything. My father is going to hear about this. What Brittany didn't know was that her father already had heard about it, and his response had been far from what she expected. Richard Harrington, CEO of Harrington Hotels, had received a very polite but firm phone call from Jonathan Cheen's legal team. The conversation had been brief and devastating. The evidence against Brittany was overwhelming. Security footage from the cafeteria incident, screenshots of the cruel social media campaign, witness testimonies from other students who had finally found the courage to speak up. But more damaging were the financial implications that Jonathan's team had uncovered. Harrington Hotels had been quietly struggling with debt, relying on a series of loans from investment firms that were unbeknownst to Richard's subsidiaries of Chin Dynamics. A few strategic adjustments to repayment terms could easily bankrupt the hotel chain, destroying decades of work and leaving the Harrington family financially ruined. The message was subtle but unmistakable. Control your daughter, or face the consequences. Meanwhile, Madison found herself in the surreal position of being simultaneously feared and respected by her classmates. Students who had once ignored her now approached with awkward attempts at friendship, their motivations transparently self-serving. She navigated these interactions with careful politeness, unsure how to process this dramatic reversal of fortune. Alex Rodriguez had been one of the few students whose treatment of Madison remained consistent. During lunch, he sat across from her in the cafeteria where she had been humiliated just days earlier. How does it feel? He asked, gesturing toward the tables where her former tormentors sat in subdued silence. Madison considered the question carefully. "Hollow," she admitted. "I thought I'd feel vindicated, but mostly I just feel empty. This isn't how I wanted things to change." "Your dad's doing what he thinks is right," Alex offered. "Sometimes parents go overboard when they see their kids getting hurt." Before Madison could respond, their conversation was interrupted by the arrival of Trevor Hamilton, one of Brittany's core followers. His usual arrogance had been replaced by nervous uncertainty. "Madison," he began awkwardly, "I wanted to apologize. For you know, the things I said. I was just going along with the crowd, and I realize now that was wrong." Madison studied his face, searching for genuine remorse, but finding only fear. "Thank you for apologizing, Trevor. I accept it." He nodded quickly and retreated, leaving Madison with the uncomfortable realization that her father's intervention had created a new kind of social dynamic, one based on fear rather than respect. Real drama began during the third period when Dr. Whitmore's voice crackled over the intercom once again. "Brittany Harrington, Chelsea Morrison, and Trevor Hamilton, please report to the main office immediately. Bring your belongings." The announcement sent shockwaves through the classroom. Madison felt her stomach drop as she realized what was happening. Her father had warned her that there would be consequences, but she hadn't fully grasped the severity of what he had planned. In the main office, Jonathan Chun sat behind Dr. Whitmore's desk, reviewing a thick file of documentation. His expression was calm and professional, but there was an underlying intensity that made the room feel charged with tension. Brittany entered first, her chin raised defiantly despite the obvious fear in her eyes. Chelsea and Trevor followed, their faces pale with apprehension. "Please sit down," Jonathan said quietly, gesturing to the chairs arranged in front of the desk. "We have several matters to discuss." He opened the file and spread out printed screenshots, security footage stills, and witness statements. The evidence of their harassment campaign was laid out with meticulous precision. "This documentation represents a pattern of systematic bullying that has continued for months," Jonathan began, his voice steady and clinical. "Harassment, public humiliation, social media campaigns designed to cause emotional distress, all directed at students who couldn't defend themselves." Brittany's composure finally cracked. "Look, if this is about your daughter, I'm sorry, okay? We were just having fun. It wasn't supposed to be a big deal." Jonathan's eyes hardened. "Miss Harrington, emotional abuse is never just having fun. You've caused significant psychological damage to multiple students, created a toxic environment that has persisted for years, and shown no genuine remorse for your actions." He turned to Chelsea and Trevor. "Both of you participated willingly in this harassment. You amplified the cruelty, encouraged the behavior, and helped create an environment where vulnerable students were systematically targeted." Trevor shifted uncomfortably in his seat. "We're really sorry, Mr. Chun. We'll do whatever it takes to make this right." "I'm sure you are sorry," Jonathan replied coldly. "But unfortunately, actions have consequences that extend beyond simple apologies." He pulled out 3 official-looking documents. "These are expulsion notices, effective immediately. You have 1 hour to clean out your lockers and leave the premises. Security will escort you to ensure there are no incidents." The room exploded in protest. Brittany shot to her feet, her face flushed with anger and disbelief. "You can't do this. My father will sue you into oblivion. This is harassment." Jonathan's expression didn't change. "Miss Harrington, your father is welcome to pursue legal action. However, I think you'll find that the evidence against you is overwhelming, and the legal precedent for expelling students who engage in systematic harassment is well established." He leaned forward slightly, his voice dropping to a whisper that somehow carried more menace than any shout. "Additionally, you might want to consider how a lawsuit would affect your family's financial situation. These legal battles can be quite expensive, and I understand your father's business has been facing some challenges recently." The implication was clear, and Brittany's face went white as she realized the full extent of the trap that had been set for her. Chelsea began to cry, her earlier bravado completely gone. "Please, Mr. Chun, we're sorry. We'll change. We'll do community service. We'll apologize publicly. Anything you want." The time for change was before you decided to systematically torment vulnerable students, Jonathan replied without a trace of sympathy. "You had numerous opportunities to show kindness, to demonstrate leadership, to be better than your worst impulses. Instead, you chose cruelty." He stood up, his presence filling the room with quiet authority. "You're no longer welcome at Riverside Preparatory Academy. Your transcripts will reflect the reason for your expulsion, and any college applications will include documentation of your disciplinary record." The finality of his words hit them like a physical blow. Their futures, carefully planned around prestigious college admissions and family expectations, had been derailed in a single moment. As security escorted them from the building, Madison watched from her classroom window. She saw Brittany arguing with the guards, saw Chelsea's shoulders shaking with sobs, saw Trevor's stunned expression as he carried his belongings to his car. The victory felt Pyrrhic. Justice had been served, but at what cost? The school that had once buzzed with life now felt subdued, almost fearful. Students whispered nervously in hallways, afraid that any misstep might bring them to Jonathan Chun's attention. Madison realized that while her father had solved the immediate problem, he had created a new one. The question now was whether Riverside Preparatory Academy would become a better place, or simply a more frightened one. 3 months after the expulsions, Riverside Preparatory Academy had settled into an uneasy peace. The atmosphere was calmer, certainly, but Madison couldn't shake the feeling that something essential had been lost in the transformation. Students moved through the hallways with careful politeness, their interactions measured and cautious. Changes went far beyond the uniform policy and security cameras. Jonathan had implemented a comprehensive social responsibility program that required all students to complete community service hours in underserved neighborhoods. Mandatory workshops on empathy and conflict resolution replaced study halls. Academic scholarships were expanded, bringing in more students from diverse backgrounds. Yet Madison found herself increasingly isolated in an unexpected way. Her classmates treated her with a mixture of respect and wariness, as if she were a loaded weapon that might explode at any moment. Even Alex Rodriguez, who had been genuinely kind before the revelation, now seemed to choose his words carefully around her. "It's like being the principal's daughter," Madison confided to her mother one evening as they prepared dinner together. "Everyone assumes I'm reporting back to Dad about everything they do." Sarah Chun paused in her chopping of vegetables, studying her daughter's troubled expression. "Are you happy with how things turned out?" Madison considered the question while stirring the soup simmering on the stove. "I'm grateful that the bullying stopped, but I'm not sure this is what I wanted. Those kids didn't learn to be better people. They just learned to be afraid." Their conversation was interrupted by Jonathan's arrival home from work. His demeanor had changed over the past months, becoming more corporate and distant even within their family dynamic. The modest suburban father who had driven a sedan and lived quietly had been replaced by someone who wielded power with calculated precision. "How was school today?" he asked Madison, settling into his chair with the weariness of someone carrying significant responsibilities. "Fine," Madison replied, the same non-committal answer she'd been giving for weeks. Jonathan's sharp eyes caught the tension in her voice. "Madison, if there are any problems, any students giving you trouble—" "Dad, that's exactly the problem," Madison interrupted, surprising herself with her boldness. "Everyone's too afraid to even talk to me normally. You didn't just change the school, you turned me into someone nobody can relate to." The dinner table fell silent. Sarah reached across to squeeze her daughter's hand, recognizing the courage it had taken to confront her father's methods. Jonathan set down his fork, his expression thoughtful. "I did what I thought was necessary to protect you." "I know you did," Madison said softly. "But protection and isolation aren't the same thing. I wanted to belong at that school, to be accepted for who I am. Now I belong because people are afraid not to accept me." The conversation marked a turning point. Over the following weeks, Madison began to assert more independence, making choices about how to navigate her transformed social environment. She started small, sitting with different groups at lunch, participating more naturally in class discussions, gradually breaking down the barriers that her father's intervention had created. The real test came when Lincoln High School announced its annual academic decathlon, open to all schools in the district. Madison approached Dr. Whitmore about forming a team, but with a specific request. She wanted to include students from other schools, including some scholarship kids from underfunded districts who rarely got opportunities to compete. "It's an interesting proposal," Dr. Whitmore said carefully, "but traditionally, academic decathlon teams represent individual schools." "Then let's start a new tradition," Madison replied with growing confidence. "If Riverside really wants to be about academic excellence and social responsibility, we should be looking for ways to lift up other students, not just compete against them." The proposal made its way to Jonathan's desk, and he found himself in the unexpected position of being challenged by his daughter's idealism. During their next family dinner, he raised the topic. "Your academic decathlon proposal is unconventional," he began. "Most meaningful changes are unconventional," Madison replied, meeting his gaze directly. "You taught me that when you bought this school." Jonathan smiled, the first genuine smile Madison had seen from him in months. "Fair point. What exactly are you proposing?" Madison outlined her vision, a collaborative team that would include the top students from Riverside, along with talented kids from less privileged schools. They would share resources, tutoring, and preparation materials. Instead of perpetuating educational inequality, they would work to bridge it. "The goal isn't just to win," Madison explained. "It's to prove that excellence doesn't depend on family, wealth, or school prestige. It depends on dedication, intelligence, and mutual support." The project became Madison's passion. She spent afternoons traveling to different schools, meeting with students who had never imagined they could compete at Riverside's level. There was Maria Santos from East Valley High, whose single mother worked 3 jobs to support 4 children. James Washington from Roosevelt Prep, who helped run his family's auto repair shop after school but still maintained a perfect GPA. Ashisha Patel from Community Charter, who had taught herself advanced calculus using library books because her school couldn't afford the textbooks. Working with these students reminded Madison why she had fallen in love with learning in the first place. Their hunger for knowledge, their determination to succeed despite obstacles, their genuine appreciation for opportunities. It all rekindled her own passion for academic achievement. The collaborative team faced skepticism from many quarters. Some Riverside parents questioned why their children should share resources with less qualified students. Competing schools accused Madison of trying to create an unfair advantage by cherry-picking talent from multiple institutions, but the students themselves embraced the project with enthusiasm. They formed study groups that met in libraries, coffee shops, and community centers. They shared notes, explained difficult concepts to each other, and built friendships that transcended the socioeconomic barriers that had traditionally divided them. Jonathan watched his daughter's transformation with growing pride and understanding. The withdrawn, isolated girl who had emerged from his heavy-handed intervention was becoming a confident young woman who understood how to use privilege responsibly. "She's found her voice," Sarah observed one evening as they watched Madison lead a study session in their living room, surrounded by students from 5 different schools. "She's found more than that," Jonathan replied. "She's found her purpose." The academic decathlon competition arrived on a crisp Saturday morning in late spring. Madison's team, officially called the Metropolitan Collaborative, faced off against traditional school teams, including several that had dominated the competition for years. The questions ranged from advanced mathematics to classical literature, from scientific principles to historical analysis. Madison watched with pride as her teammates demonstrated the depth of their preparation and the strength of their collaborative approach. Maria Santos answered a complex economics question with precision that surprised the judges. James Washington solved a physics problem that had stumped students from much more expensive private schools. Asif Patel's essay on social justice was so compelling that it drew spontaneous applause from the audience. When the results were announced, the Metropolitan Collaborative had placed second overall, an extraordinary achievement for a first-year team composed of students from such diverse backgrounds. But more importantly, they had proven Madison's central thesis, that excellence could emerge from anywhere when given the right support and opportunities. As the celebration wound down and students began to head home, Madison found herself standing in the empty auditorium with her father. The space that had once been the site of her public humiliation now held memories of triumph and collaboration. "I'm proud of you," Jonathan said quietly. "Not just for the competition results, but for how you chose to use the opportunities you were given." Madison smiled, feeling more like herself than she had in months. "I learned from watching you. You used your power to change things when they were wrong. I just wanted to make sure the changes were the right ones." They walked toward the exit together, father and daughter, both understanding that the real victory hadn't been about academic decathlon scores or expelled bullies. It had been about learning that true power comes not from fear or intimidation, but from the courage to lift others up and create opportunities for everyone to succeed. Outside, the sun was setting over Riverside Preparatory Academy, casting long shadows across the campus that had been transformed not once, but twice, first by fear, then by hope. And in that transformation, Madison Chun had discovered not just her own strength, but her responsibility to use it wisely. 6 months later, an unexpected letter arrived at the Chun household that would test everything Madison had learned about forgiveness and second chances. The envelope bore the letterhead of Westfield Academy, a small private school across town, and was addressed specifically to Madison. Inside, written in careful handwriting, was a letter from Brittany Harrington. "Dear Madison," it began, "I know you have no reason to read this, let alone respond to it, but I'm hoping you'll give me a chance to explain what's happened since I left Riverside." Madison stared at the letter for several minutes before continuing to read. The girl who had once tormented her with such calculated cruelty was asking for her attention, and Madison wasn't sure how to feel about it. "After the expulsion, my family lost almost everything. Dad's business collapsed when his loans were called in, and we had to sell our house and move into a small apartment. I know now that your father had the power to destroy us financially, but he chose restraint. That act of mercy, when he could have been ruthless, taught me something I'd never understood before." The letter continued for 3 pages, detailing Brittany's transformation over the past months. Without the cushion of wealth and privilege, she had been forced to confront the reality of struggle for the first time in her life. She had enrolled at Westfield Academy on a need-based scholarship, worked part-time at a grocery store to help with family expenses, and slowly begun to understand the weight of hardship that she had once mocked in others. "I'm not writing to ask for forgiveness," the letter concluded. "I know I don't deserve it. I'm writing because I wanted you to know that the person who hurt you is gone. She was a creation of privilege and fear, and when those things were stripped away, I had to learn who I really was underneath. I'm still figuring that out, but I wanted to thank you for being strong enough to endure what I put you through, and for having a father who understood that true justice isn't about destruction, it's about the possibility of redemption. Madison." carried the letter with her for days, reading it multiple times and wrestling with complicated emotions. Part of her remained angry at the girl who had made her life miserable. Another part felt a grudging respect for someone who seemed to be genuinely attempting to change. The decision about how to respond came during a conversation with Maria Santos, who had become one of Madison's closest friends since the academic decathlon. They were studying together in the Riverside Library when Madison mentioned the letter. "What are you going to do?" Maria asked, looking up from her calculus homework. "I don't know," Madison admitted. "Part of me wants to ignore it. Part of me is curious about whether people can really change." Maria considered this thoughtfully. "My older brother used to be in a gang. Did some terrible things, hurt people who didn't deserve it. But he's different now, works with kids in the neighborhood, tries to keep them from making his mistakes. People said he'd never change, but he proved them wrong." "How do you know when change is real versus just convenient?" Madison asked. "Time," Maria said simply. "Real change shows itself over time, when nobody's watching, when there's nothing to gain from pretending." That conversation planted a seed in Madison's mind. Over the following weeks, she found herself researching Westfield Academy and its scholarship programs. She discovered that Brittany had indeed enrolled there, was maintaining a solid GPA while working part-time, and had started a peer tutoring program for students struggling with the transition to private school academics. The information wasn't public. Madison had to dig through school newsletters and local newspaper articles to piece together the picture. But the emerging portrait was of someone who seemed to be living quietly, working hard, and contributing positively to her new environment without seeking recognition or praise. Meanwhile, Madison's own life had continued to evolve in unexpected directions. The Metropolitan Collaborative had become a permanent program, expanding to include students from 8 different schools across the district. Madison found herself in the role of coordinator, managing schedules, resources, and relationships between institutions that had never worked together before. The work was challenging but deeply fulfilling. She discovered that she had inherited her father's talent for organization and strategic thinking, but applied it in ways that built bridges rather than walls. College admissions officers had begun to take notice, and Madison had received early acceptance letters from several prestigious universities. Jonathan watched his daughter's development with a mixture of pride and amazement. The shy, bullied girl who had once hidden in the shadows had become a confident leader who moved easily between different social worlds. "You've become quite the diplomat," he observed one evening as Madison coordinated a conference call between students, teachers, and administrators from multiple schools. "I learned from the best," Madison replied with a smile. "Though I think I prefer building coalitions to buying companies." Their conversation was interrupted by the doorbell. Madison opened the door to find a delivery driver holding a large basket of flowers with an attached card. The arrangement was beautiful, but modest, clearly expensive enough to be meaningful, but not so extravagant as to be inappropriate. The card was signed by Brittany Harrington with a simple message: "Congratulations on your college acceptances. You deserve every opportunity coming your way." Madison stared at the card, surprised by the gesture and uncertain about the sender's motivations. How had Brittany even learned about her college acceptances? The information hadn't been widely publicized. The answer came the next day when Alex Rodriguez approached her after their AP history class. "Hey, I heard about the flowers." Pretty classy move from someone who used to be such a nightmare. "How did you know about that?" Madison asked. "My cousin goes to Westfield," Alex explained. "Says Brittany asked him to help her find out about your college stuff. She wanted to send congratulations but wasn't sure if it would be welcome." Madison felt a complicated mix of emotions. The gesture suggested that Brittany had been thinking about her positively, but it also raised questions about boundaries and whether this contact was appropriate. That weekend, Madison made a decision that surprised even herself. She wrote a brief response note thanking Brittany for the flowers and wishing her well in her own academic pursuits. She kept the message neutral, but not unkind, acknowledging the gesture without inviting further contact. The response she received a week later was equally measured. Brittany thanked her for the reply and included an update about her own college applications and community service work. The tone was respectful and distant, exactly what Madison had hoped for. Over the following months, an occasional correspondence developed between them. Not friendship, exactly, but a civil exchange between two people who had shared a difficult history and were both trying to learn from it. Brittany wrote about her struggles adapting to a life without privilege, her work with younger students who were facing their own challenges, and her slowly developing understanding of empathy and responsibility. Madison found these exchanges oddly healing. Not because she had forgiven everything, some wounds run too deep for complete forgiveness, but because they represented something she had never expected to see: genuine accountability and change. The final letter arrived just before Madison's high school graduation. Brittany wrote that she had been accepted to a state university on academic scholarship and planned to study education with a focus on anti-bullying programs. She wanted to work with schools to create environments where what had happened between them could never happen again. "I know I can't undo the harm I caused," Brittany wrote, "but maybe I can help prevent it from happening to others. You showed me that strength doesn't come from tearing others down, it comes from building something better. I'm still learning how to do that, but I wanted you to know that your example has become my guide." Madison read the letter while sitting in her childhood bedroom, surrounded by boxes packed for college. In a few months, she would be starting at Stanford University, where she planned to study business and social policy. Her goal was to develop programs that could scale her metropolitan collaborative model to schools across the country. As she folded the letter and placed it in her desk drawer, Madison realized that the girl who had once been broken by bullying had not just survived, she had become someone who could help others heal. And perhaps most surprisingly, she had learned that even the people who hurt us most deeply are capable of change, given the right circumstances and enough time. The story that had begun with cruelty and ended with purchased justice had evolved into something more complex and hopeful, a testament to the possibility of growth, the power of second chances, and the understanding that true strength lies not in dominance, but in the courage to build a better world for everyone. 5 years had passed since Madison Chun first walked through the doors of Riverside Preparatory Academy as a scared scholarship student. Now she stood at the podium of the same auditorium where her father had once announced his takeover, but this time as the youngest keynote speaker in the school's history. The audience before her was dramatically different from the one that had witnessed her humiliation years earlier. The student body now included faces from every economic background, every neighborhood in the city, every family structure imaginable. The Metropolitan Collaborative Program had evolved into the Chun Educational Initiative, a nonprofit organization that Madison had founded during her junior year at Stanford and had now grown to serve over 200 schools across 15 states. Dr. Whitmore, now in her final year before retirement, introduced Madison with genuine warmth. Today's speaker needs no introduction to those of us who have witnessed the transformation of our institution. Madison Chun graduated as our valedictorian, earned her degree summa cum laude from Stanford University, and has dedicated her life to ensuring that quality education is accessible to all students, regardless of their family's financial circumstances. Madison approached the microphone with the confident bearing of someone who had learned to wield influence responsibly. She was dressed professionally, but not ostentatiously, a deliberate choice that reflected her understanding of how appearance could either build bridges or create barriers. "When I first arrived at Riverside," she began, her voice carrying easily through the auditorium, "I believed that if I just worked hard enough, if I proved myself academically, I would earn acceptance and respect. What I learned instead was that merit alone isn't always enough to overcome prejudice and systemic inequality. She paused, scanning the faces in the audience: current students, faculty, parents, and community members who had gathered for this special assembly marking the 5th anniversary of the school's transformation. But I also learned something more important, that when you have the power to change systems, you have the responsibility to use that power wisely. My father taught me that lesson, though perhaps not in the way he initially intended. In the front row, Jonathan and Sarah Chun watched their daughter with expressions of profound pride. Jonathan had stepped back from direct involvement in the school's operations 2 years earlier, allowing the institution to develop its own culture of inclusion and excellence. His intervention had been the catalyst, but Madison's sustained effort had been what created lasting change. The question I want to pose to you today, Madison continued, is not whether you have the power to make a difference. You do. The question is whether you'll choose to use that power to build others up or tear them down. She gestured toward a section of the auditorium where several special guests were seated. I'd like you to meet some of the students who have benefited from the programs we've developed here at Riverside. Maria Santos, who started with us in the academic decathlon, is now a pediatric nurse working in underserved communities. James Washington completed his engineering degree and has started a nonprofit that provides STEM education in low-income neighborhoods. Aisha Patel is finishing her law degree and plans to specialize in educational policy. The audience applauded as each young person stood to acknowledge the recognition. These success stories represented not just individual achievement, but proof that the collaborative model Madison had pioneered could create opportunities that transcended traditional barriers. But the most important lesson I've learned, Madison said as the applause faded, is that transformation isn't just about changing institutions. It's about changing hearts and minds. She reached into her jacket pocket and pulled out a folded letter, worn from multiple readings. 3 years ago, I received a letter from someone I never expected to hear from again. Someone who had once made my life very difficult and who I had every reason to dismiss or ignore. The auditorium grew quiet as Madison unfolded the letter. Many of the older faculty members recognized the significance of what she was about to share. This letter came from Brittany Harrington, a former student who was expelled from Riverside for her role in a systematic campaign of harassment against me and other students. In her letter, she wrote about her own journey losing her family's wealth, learning to work for what she needed, and slowly developing empathy for people whose struggles she had once mocked. Madison looked up from the letter, her eyes finding several faces in the audience who were listening with particular intensity: students who had their own stories of being bullied or excluded. I'm sharing this not because I think everyone deserves automatic forgiveness, but because I've learned that people are capable of profound change when they're given the right circumstances and support. Brittany is now a teacher in an inner-city school, working specifically with programs designed to prevent bullying and create inclusive environments. The revelation sent murmurs through the audience. Few people had known about the correspondence between Madison and her former tormentor, and even fewer understood the depth of transformation that had occurred on both sides. Last month, Brittany invited me to visit her school and speak to her students about resilience and educational opportunity. Standing in that classroom, watching her work with kids who reminded me of myself at that age, I realized something important. The cycle of hurt doesn't have to perpetuate itself. We can choose to break it. Madison folded the letter and returned it to her pocket. That choice, the choice to break cycles of cruelty and create opportunities for growth, is available to each of you. Whether you're dealing with someone who has hurt you or recognizing harmful patterns in your own behavior, you have the power to choose something different. She moved away from the podium, walking closer to the student section of the auditorium. Some of you in this audience are struggling with bullying, either as targets or as participants. Some of you are watching it happen and doing nothing. And some of you are actively working to create a more inclusive environment. Her voice grew more passionate as she continued. To those who are being targeted, your worth is not determined by other people's cruelty. You have value that extends far beyond their narrow understanding. Seek help, find allies, and remember that this difficult time is not your permanent reality. She turned to address another section. To those who have participated in exclusion or harassment, it's not too late to change. Real strength comes from lifting others up, not from asserting dominance. You have the power to become someone better than your worst moments. Finally, she addressed the bystanders. And to those who have watched harmful behavior without intervening, your silence is a choice with consequences. You have the power to speak up, to include the excluded, to model the behavior you want to see. Madison returned to the podium for her final remarks. The Chun Educational Initiative will continue to expand, not because we want to impose our model on other schools, but because we want to prove that inclusive excellence is possible everywhere. We're launching a new program next year that will provide resources and training to students who want to become peer mediators and inclusion advocates in their own schools. The announcement drew enthusiastic applause from the audience. Madison smiled, remembering the shy girl who had once been afraid to speak up in class discussions. Before I close, I want to acknowledge the person who made all of this possible, my father, Jonathan Chun. Dad, you saw your daughter being hurt, and you used your power to stop it. That intervention gave me the safety I needed to find my voice and my purpose. But more importantly, you taught me that having power means nothing unless you use it to create opportunities for others. Jonathan wiped away tears as the audience turned to acknowledge him with sustained applause. To the graduating seniors in the audience, Madison concluded, you're about to enter a world that desperately needs people who understand the difference between authority and leadership, between power and influence, between success and significance. You have been educated not just in academic subjects, but in the principles of empathy, inclusion, and social responsibility. She paused for a final time, looking out over an audience that represented the diversity and potential she had worked so hard to cultivate. The girl who was once mocked for her second-hand clothes now stands before you as proof that your circumstances don't define your destiny. But more than that, I stand here as evidence that when we choose to build rather than destroy, when we choose inclusion over exclusion, when we choose growth over stagnation, we create a world where everyone has the opportunity to reach their full potential. As Madison stepped away from the podium to thunderous applause, she caught sight of a familiar figure in the back of the auditorium. Brittany Harrington had come to hear her speak, wearing the simple attire of a dedicated teacher and carrying herself with the quiet dignity of someone who had learned hard lessons well. Their eyes met across the crowded auditorium, and both women smiled, not the reconciliation of former friends, but the acknowledgement of two people who had traveled difficult roads and emerged as better versions of themselves. The story that had begun with cruelty and purchased justice had evolved into something neither of them could have imagined, a testament to the power of education to transform not just individual lives, but entire communities. And in that transformation, Madison Chun had discovered her life's work, not just succeeding despite the obstacles placed in her path, but removing those obstacles for the students who would come after her. As the audience rose in standing ovation, Madison knew that this was not the end of her story, but the beginning of a legacy that would extend far beyond the marble halls of Riverside Preparatory Academy. The shy scholarship student had become a force for change, proving that sometimes the greatest victories come not from defeating your enemies, but from helping them become better people than they ever thought possible. Up next, you've got two more standout stories right on your screen. If this one hits the mark, you won't want to pass these up. Just click and check them out. And don't forget to subscribe and turn on the notification bell so you don't miss any upload from us.